Hi, everybody, and welcome back to Podcana episode 62. We are here off the back of the DFW Lorcana challenge, in which I was casting when it was an epic event. Almost 2,000 players showed up, and we had quite the battle in day two in the top 64, ultimately with Ed taking it down with Ruby Amethyst. We actually have Ed coming on the pod for a special segment to break down that tournament, Ruby Amethyst in general, and also extrapolating this current metagame into what it looks like for the next couple of weeks. We have one more challenge over in Europe before the Bucky errata hits. So keen to hear his thoughts and his level ups for how you can prepare for that tournament or dominate your upcoming store championships. You guys were not at the event, of course, because you're over in Europe. Did you have a chance to catch some of the coverage?
I caught a little bit, not so much of day one, a little bit of day two. The main game I actually tuned into was Zach Bivens versus an Emerald Steel player, and I was actually particularly interested to watch that match because Zach brought Amber Emerald, which was a bit of an underdog deck, I would say.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, and it looked pretty unfortunate because like pretty much the one game I really got to tune into for day two, it seemed like the Emerald Steel player got extremely lucky in those games, but for the most part I did get to watch a little bit of clips from like the VODs from day one and day two, and I personally want to say, Brendan, I think you did a fantastic job at casting, and I think a lot of the fans really appreciated you casting as well. They really appreciated like the kind of analytical take that you brought to the desk. So yeah, congrats on that, and I hope they definitely hire you for the next one.
So I want to bring up something that Moyen sent to me. I think I have a screenshot of it on my phone. And I'm not proud of this, but it was particularly funny for me to read because I did not know that this had occurred. Let me see if I can find it. Basically, there was a point in which Moyen goes this. He goes, this is at 5:03 p.m. on Saturday. But he goes, watch Sky's game with you cast on. When Rebecca asks you how you got started in Lorcana, you immediately talk about chess openings with hypergeometric math for 10 minutes without answering her question. Yeah, that was an accident. I did not realize that I'd been asked a question. I do remember that we were talking about the background of a certain player. I think in regards, they had a chess background. We had seen their winners interview. And I think I'd taken said question to be, how do you think that this player's chess background affects Lorcana? And, you know, particularly interesting topic if you're a Lorcana listener or a Podcana listener. We do talk a lot about sort of the aspect of chess that is starting to permeate the game right now. So I thought that was both unfortunate but also hilarious because kind of really puts on display my lack of social cues there. But yeah, I did get a lot of feedback, overwhelmingly positive, but I think that's because we also live in a bit of an echo chamber. So we have like the Podcana Discord, you know, we have people that are commenting on the pod, and the people DMing me and reaching out to me. Obviously, you know, they're DMing because they liked it. I did see some critical feedback that was like a casual channel had posted one of the videos, and I think that the feedback they gave was pretty reasonable, to be honest. The interesting thing about the dynamic of casting at this event in particular is different than anything I've ever done. So I've done world championships, I've done pro tours for Flesh and Blood, and I've cast for about 2-3 years. And usually the split is play-by-play and color. So play-by-play is basically calling exactly what's on the board. You have one caster doing that. And color is more analytical. So extrapolating from what's happening to talk about strategies, what cards players are looking for, you know, key interactions, things like that. For this cast, it was one person was play-by-play and color. And then the other person was this sort of magical role where there was this like Disney references, kind of general hosting, things like that. And I'd been put on the play-by-play and color, and I wasn't too familiar with how to fill that dynamic and to fill it in a way that gave, I think, some of my codecasters enough time to sort of speak and express themselves, which is one critique that I think was very fair. I think I got a little overwhelmed by doing play-by-play and color because that is a lot of airtime. Because previously in my previous experiences, that would have been both roles. So yeah, still getting used to it, but it was a pretty good experience casting. I enjoyed it. We had some long days, not going to lie. I think Saturday was, you know, I got home at probably 11 p.m., didn't get to sleep till about 1, and then back up for Sunday morning. So we had some long days, but overall it was great. I thought the other casters did great, and I thought the production was fantastic. The reduction of dead air in between games, I think, is absolutely critical to keep viewers tuned in to watch a TCG. And I think Magic, the Magic Pro Tour, has pioneered that, and they have really pushed that aspect of sort of constant gameplay and constant interaction. And now we're seeing other TCGs follow, and I think that's absolutely correct. Also, for the audio issues, a lot of people were talking about audio issues. It's not 100% the production's fault. I'd had audio issues with this production crew in particular in the past. To be honest, I do have a bit of a range. Like I go a little bit too high and a little bit too low. And yeah, it's just really hard to get my mic volume correct. And that's just a me thing. It's pretty bad, to be honest. Anyway, if you want to give your thoughts on casting and you want to give feedback for Dallas, if you want to see more of what you saw or less of what you saw, I'm going to include a link to the Lorcana official Discord in the description, as well as a link to the channel where you can provide said feedback. So a lot of people are asking where to do that. Anyway, Moin, did you have a chance to catch any of the coverage?
I was watching some of it live with my girlfriend, and the moment where you got asked and then you just kind of went on about chess, we were already dying from laughter. And then I told her, he's like 5 minutes away from talking about hypergeometric math. Next sentence, you talk about it. Oh, I couldn't. Yeah, so we basically watched it live until there was a sapphire steel mirror shown, and then I was like, yeah, let's go do something else.
Yeah, I feel like we did get a lot of we did get a lot of diversity on screen, which is pretty cool. I like to focus, so I think I'm an outlier. I like to focus on the top tables. I'm assuming you guys probably do as well. It's cool to see diversity at the top tables. I do feel like we found a good middle ground during the cast at DFW. So Flesh and Blood, for instance, they take the extreme. While they do kind of focus on the top tables, they pick deck diversity over everything. And what you end up with at some Pro Tours and Worlds is you will watch Swiss rounds that are not indicative of the metagame that showed up whatsoever. And I actually really, really, really don't like that. I know some people do. So that is absolutely a matter of opinion. There's not an objectively correct way to evaluate that. But I prefer for the Swiss rounds to, have some spicy decks, to showcase some new decks, but I want them to be indicative of the tournament that people are actually playing. And Flesh and Blood has taken a way too extreme line and trying to get diversity over top tables on that. That is funny though. That is funny more with the hypergym. You know me too well. Also, we had to have the conversation of, should you have 4 drops? Should you have 8-1 drops? Should you have 4 brawls and 2 Peter Pans? Should you, I love it. It's funny. One thing that happened a lot during the cast is my co-caster, and this is their role, to ask questions that they know the answer to. But they would ask, what is this Emerald Steel player looking for in their opener? Now that they're on the draw, or now that they're playing Ruby Amethyst, or now they're playing Ruby Sapphire, now they're playing... I was like... Unfortunately, it's the same fucking thing every time. It's just the same opener, which is, that's just how that deck is. That is a linear, aggressive deck that asks the question and wants to do the same thing every single time.
There's only one difference, and it's what I talked about very briefly, but when you talk about top tables and stuff, you're rarely going to see it. It only slightly differs when you're against the hyper aggro deck, where you actually do care about having some form of keeping Let the Storm Rage on, or some sort of removal, because sometimes the bookie discard package and that, they dump their whole hand anyways. It doesn't really do too much. But yes, 99% of your matches, it's literally just have the nuts combo.
Yeah.
On the play against Ruby Sapphire, Ursula Deceiver is kind of good. Against Sapphire Steel, the Robin Hood shift line is better than it would usually be. It's still worse than the Diablo line, but it's a little bit closer.
I would say, it was funny. The answer was actually, we didn't see too much Ruby Sapphire. Ruby Sapphire is actually one of the least played decks out of top played decks. Amber Steel is actually more played than Ruby Sapphire, which blew my mind. Amber Steel did well, of course. But the Ruby Sapphire question is the same. It's like, oh, so what is this Ruby Sapphire looking to do on turn 2? And I'm like, one jump ahead, baby, every single time, just looking to one jump ahead. But I really enjoyed some of the stream matches. I thought we had some fantastic matches on stream, particularly, Alberto, who has top 64 3 challenges in a row, and, top 8 and top 16 challenge. We got to see his game where you get to see a player play to their outs and not find it. So Alberto dug through, I think, over half his deck to look for a single Be Prepared. No, sir. No, sir. But it was a great example of playing through routes, so I actually enjoyed the match. And bad beats for Alberto, though. Alberto is actually a local of mine. Funny enough, I've been playing Ruby Amethyst Mirrors against him since set one. Did you guys have a chance to get out to any store championships this past weekend?
I'll let Moyen talk about it first.
Yeah, I did. I played 2 last weekend, 1 the weekend before. I'm playing 2 on the coming weekend, and so far in my 3 set jumps this week, I went first place, third place, and first place.
Yeah.
Nice.
What'd you play?
I played red blue, and in total I beat when I played against Ruby Amethyst, which is usually the matchup people are worried about. I think I played against 5 matches against very competent players, and I won 4 of them. And I lost 1.
Yeah. And I think that we saw that on display at the challenge as well. Ruby Sapphire is one of the, like I said, one of the least represented decks, but the Ruby Sapphires that did show up and did do well were clearly teched for the Ruby Amethyst matchup. So that is the key difference, which is, if you listen to the pod 1 week ago, maybe 2 weeks ago, the metagame was very much shifting away from Ruby Sapphire. And we asked ourselves the question is like, okay, if we can tech this deck versus Ruby Amethyst, we have the best deck in the metagame. Theoretically, I think it has one of the best coverages. One deck that did really well and actually showed up in force was Sapphire Steel. I feel like Sapphire Steel was, there was conversations about it. Obviously, there's players that have been championing it since the beginning of the, the new expansion. But I feel like Sapphire Steel was pretty well positioned in that metagame, and people sort of brought it in force to the challenge in DFW, which I was impressed with. Also, despite what anybody says, despite any kind of shit we talk on this podcast, Emerald Steel, still the just ridiculous. The conversion rate, insane into day 2.
64%, I think, if I remember correctly. Oh, maybe 46%, but something crazy, yeah.
Guess what the most played deck was, too? Do you guys know?
Well, no, I actually don't know
what the most
played
Ruby Amethyst.
Yeah,
do you have data on that now?
So I had data. I can maybe pull it up on my phone if you guys want to. I can definitely pull it up on my phone.
Yeah, I need the data. I
saw on Twitter someone posted basically the top 64, like a pie chart of the top 64, and I think it was actually 46 rather than 64 for day.
You guys ready? This is secret, I guess. By the way, I guess this wasn't public, so I have this. This is the metagame breakdown for day 1. So day 1, Ruby Amethyst, 408 players, 24.5%. Emerald Steel, 393, 23.5%.
Bro, that's like identical to Bochum. What?
Yep. Sapphire Steel, third most played deck, 258 players, 15.5%. Now you guys ready? You ready for the drop-off?
It's Amber Steel.
Amber Steel, 146, 8.7%. And then our sort of least played deck out of our pillars of the metagame, Ruby Sapphire, 119, 7% of players.
Wow.
Ruby Sapphire could have been the third most played deck. Wouldn't have been surprised. I was surprised at how low it was. There was so much Amber Steel.
That's one of the main differences. It was the same, I'm pretty sure, except it was. Oh, actually, I'll have to double check, but I know obviously it was Ruby Amethyst, then it was Emerald Steel and Bochum, and then out of the top 4, it was either Sapphire Steel and then Red Blue, or the other way around. But Amber Steel was definitely like the 5th one, I remember, rather than the 4th. So that's interesting. Like, what do you think people's I kind of guess I know the reason myself, but do you think that the reasoning that people are hopping onto Amber Steel more is they find that the matchup against Ruby Amethyst is a little bit more favored in terms of they have the flutes, they have the uninteractable lore gain, that type of stuff? Do you think that's what they feel like that deck brings to the table?
Yeah.
Yes.
I think Amber Steel is in this position where it can probably be favored against both of the most played decks. So it's like a pretty good meta call, at least for the tournament, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's a good meta call. I think that the metagame can adapt to that. Yeah. Maybe not Ruby Amethyst in particular, but I think Ruby Sapphire. What's funny is Ruby Sapphire, very, very powerful deck, but I also feel like it can be sort of retrofitted for a lot of metagames. If you can predict the right metagame, Ruby Sapphire just seems like such a toolbox of a deck, because you had 1 Judy Hopps, 2 Judy Hopps. I think that your 2 Judy Hopps is a lot, don't get me wrong. I think your matchup in Amber Steel gets way better, like way, way, way better, because you blow up 1 flute, and I think that you're super favored against that deck. If Amber Steel does not have flutes, like a Ruby Sapphire is just absolutely destroys that deck.
Ever since set 2, Ruby Sapphire really destroyed Amber Steel. I feel like once people hopped on the flute package a little bit more, it was harder. But yeah, I think for the most part, it's still quite favored for Ruby Sapphire in general. Although that being said, like we have seen more low to the ground Amber Steel builds, like a little bit more aggressive ones. For example, this weekend when I played in Store Champs, I was in the top 8, and I was on Emerald Steel, but my opponent was playing an Amber Steel deck that was like super low to the ground, tons of 1-drops. The engine was pretty much just like Rockstar Stitch, and it was a scary deck. It was I won 2-1, but my god, there was one game where they literally they didn't have to go over 3 ink, and they had so many characters and started off with so many like Cinderellas and stuff that they were just absolutely blitzing me as against Emerald Steel. So yeah, it's a scary deck, and there's kind of a similar thing to Ruby Sapphire, like you said, Brendan. I think the Amber Steel nowadays has a lot of different tools, a big toolbox that it can kind of utilize if it wants to be that little bit more aggressive, or if it wants to focus more on like the flute package, or like, you know, it wants to be more of a mid-range deck with, you know, lanterns or something like that. The options are nearly endless for Amber Steel. And I mean, I know we're not going to get into it yet, but I'm not going to lie, I've seen some crazy Amber cards coming in for set 5. I mean, some absolute... I saw a card the other day. If anyone who's keeping up with card reveals, they'll know this one. It does not even compare to Pride Lands. It is absolutely insane. It's a location that's very... You know what card it is. It is ridiculous. So, yeah, keep your note. I actually love how Moyen doesn't keep up with the card reveals, because he gets so surprised when the new ones come out.
Yeah, and when he really likes it, he says, "Bam!"
Yeah.
Somebody was memeing on that in the comments, like, I know that Moyen's fucking hyped about something when he goes, "Bam, bam."
He's not wrong.
It's like the Moyenism. Yeah, very interesting metagame.
Yeah.
That's the reason I really like this game, is I feel like Lorcana is, you know, there's a huge deck building aspect. There's a huge gameplay and sort of kinetic aspect. You know, make sure you sequence correctly, you play tight. But dude, the metagame of this of Lorcana is huge. Like predicting the meta and bringing the right list with the right tech cards, because there's no sideboard, is just so critical to doing well at one of these tournaments. I particularly liked Ed's list, actually. So we're gonna have Ed on the pod. We're gonna talk about that list, but Ed had 2 cards, you know, a couple cards that weren't in a lot of Ruby Amethyst lists. You know, 2 of them being the 8-cost uninkable Sisu, which, I mean, won him the game, I believe, at one point in the finals, won him a game. But also the disparity between 8 1-drops. So a lot of these Ruby Amethyst lists were running 4 1-drops. And I think we asked the question on the podcast last week, can you run 8? Because when you were running 4, it just felt so ass with the Mono Min package. It was like, okay, I have the Mono Min package for my Rabbit. I don't really ever have, you know, I rarely have a 1-drop on 1 because I can't really prioritize mulliganing it for so much because I need the brawl. It's like, can I fit 8 1-drops in here? And Ed said yes. And Ed cut the B King Undisputeds and the Tremaines. And we've talked about in the pod before how much of a fan we are of potential, you know, X Medusa 0 Tremaine. You're obviously very soft to something like Tematoa. You only have B prepared. You don't even have B Kings for it. But just play the better cards. Like B King Undisputed, I understand it can be good sometimes. It is an ass card. It's not very good. Like, it's not very good. It's uninkable.
It can sit in your hand for a while. Yeah.
Yeah, and your opponent puts a fucking Pegasus on the field. Good luck. Yeah, Tamatoa is sitting right next to it. Good luck. That card is so dead sometimes, and I understand the right metagame. It can be okay, and can be good in Ruby Amethyst because you can just really tempo people out. But it is definitely the worst card in the deck. I don't think anybody could debate that. Maybe you can make the case that Brawl is a worse card, sort of in general, but you know, Brawl is obviously there for the damn bird that's hanging out everywhere. So really interesting list, and I thought that this is one of the best lists that showed up, so I'm happy that it won the tournament. By the way, we talked about Amber Steel. We had an Amber Steel semifinal, a fucking mirror. You guys know that?
No, I didn't know that.
It's not mirror in the semifinal. Sorry, I think it was a quarter. Oh, was it a quarter? Yeah, it was a quarterfinal. A quarterfinal mirror. It's like crazy.
Yeah, that's wild.
Did not expect that.
About the Ruby Amethyst list, I think what has impressed me the most is that it is very different to like the stock standard Ruby Amethyst list. And it's 2 players that bought this exact list, and they both made it to like at least top 16. So winner in top 16 or something, or maybe it was top 32, but they both made top cut, and that is very, very impressive.
You guys want another fun fact? The final was the first Swiss seed versus the second Swiss seed.
Yeah, I know.
Oh, wow.
That was what the it's so crazy.
By the way, so if because sometimes people like to suggest the play draw advantage that is like somewhat of a myth. And how likely is it for first and second seed to make it into the finals if it is a myth?
Yeah, I think we saw some great play draw differentials on stream. I tried not to talk about it too much because actually nobody corrected me on it, but I feel like it's not the best thing to harp on. But you did see some big play draw differentials, particularly in things like Ruby Amethyst versus Emerald Steel, where you would see the Beast come down early, you would see the Diablo not get answered immediately, and how impactful that can be, because it is extremely impactful.
I have some feedback for you, Brennan. Actually, I just remember this because it's something I know that if I was casting initially, I would probably struggle with, but it's basic Lorcana vocabulary. I did catch you a few times saying attack. Yeah. I'm sure you were corrected.
So
to say
that was the
challenge.
one. That was the one. Yeah, that was the one. So I actually was saying attack to refer to the strength. So I knew that challenge.
That's probably worse than to call strength attack. Yeah.
I actually didn't even have strength in my mind. So that was the hardest part about casting the entire tournament, by the way, was, okay, so you have these new terms. By the way, mulligan. You can't say mulligan.
You can say alter. Yeah.
Yeah.
They alter that
stuff. But it really... Even though it's not that hard, because it's from I don't know. But even though it's not that hard, you have to put everything through a filter that really slows you down and kind of trips you up. You get used to it over the weekend, but man, it was a fucking learning curve. So I didn't have the word for strength. I was like, I knew willpower, I knew challenge, I knew banish zone, I knew alter your hand, but then I was like, oh, it has two, and I was like, I don't even have. I never said that word for Lorcana. I've always said attack. I've literally never said the word, and I was like, I don't even have it. I don't even have it in my vocabulary right now. So that was a new challenge. But they, honestly, it's not that. Even if you mess up, it's not like it's that bad. Yeah. But ideally, you're not doing that.
Did you do the Spessy classic of if it was 1-1 that both players won? Yeah. Did you get that lesson?
Oh, one time in one match, I was just not used to doing 2-game. I've only cast 3 games in my life. So both players went 1-1, and I was like, dude, I can't wait for this third game. It was it's 2-game. Yeah, so not ideal. Not ideal. Yeah. And it just takes some getting used to, because it's a whole different thing. By the way, before we get into the Spilled Ink, our listener question section, I do want to say, actually, I think it might be a question here that we had, was someone was asking about working with Ravensburger and what I thought. So I actually got to talk to some Ravensburger employees. I'm not going to name them because I don't know if these conversations are public or private, but I had some very good conversations with them, particularly with the person that runs sort of the marketing team and the team that does OP. And they were very knowledgeable and articulate and very intentional as well, which I think is the most important part. So even if I don't agree with all of the decisions regarding OP, and the only one that I really disagree with is day 2, cut the top 64. In my opinion, it should be day 2 Swiss, and then cut the top 8. They were doing it for a reason, and they were very intentional about it, and they had thought through it, which was very important to me. And I feel like the person that's leading that team has very good leadership skills as well, and you can tell. So I walked away from the experience optimistic, where I will say sometimes in the past I have talked to the people behind games and it's made me less pessimistic, but in this case I was really impressed by the Ravensburger team and sort of how they were handling everything, because you have to think about it too. A lot of this OP team is 3 months old, and also they went from expecting 500 players to show up to these events to 2,000 and selling out in 2 seconds. It's actually crazy that they've kind of taken across the line the way they have so far. So working with Ravensburger is great.
I've heard the last NA event sold out in literal seconds.
The Vegas one, right? Yeah.
Yeah, and now I shit my pants because I actually booked my flight to Seattle today. And if I don't get a ticket, I might be screwed.
Yes.
We will help. I will try and help you, Moyen. We will.
Yes. So I don't know if we should tell people. I don't think there's anything wrong with it, but there's definitely a way that you can help secure tickets for.
Oh
your
no,
friends.
I actually don't think that's too bad. Because there's been instances of when people are at work and people you can buy for other people.
Yeah,
and
I got Toronto because of this guy right here.
No, that's a lie. You got
Kim.
No.
Kim.
You got Toronto because of Kim.
Yeah, Kim. Yeah, Kim. True. Yeah, I didn't get a ticket for Toronto. I was like, fuck. And then Kawa just like randomly messaged me as I was walking out the door. He's like, you need a ticket? And I'm like, yes. So that's pretty hype. Anyway. So let's go ahead and head on to this building section. So our listener question section. If you have your question read out on next week's podcast, shoot us a comment on YouTube and I will pass this over to you, Kawa.
First comment is from Darth. I won our set championship with Emerald Amethyst with 18 players. I did get lucky to avoid a lot of the steel matchups, but I farmed Ruby Amethyst and Ruby Sapphire decks. I think it's a fine meta call, honestly. If you're expecting a lot of Ruby Amethyst at your local set champs, then clearly it was the right call, right? I think that is pretty impressive. And a lot of this type of stuff with like Emerald Amethyst and stuff, we were just talking about conversion rate and deck representation and stuff like that. I honestly feel like Emerald Amethyst right now in this meta, if you have put in enough reps on the deck and you do feel pretty confident, I think it's a fine bring to a challenge. Yeah. We saw some Emerald Amethyst players perform pretty well in Bockham. I don't know, Brendan, if you saw many in Dallas yourself, but I honestly think it's a fine bring if you really know how to play out all the matchups.
Fortunately, we're witnessing the rise of Amber Steel, which I think is pretty well positioned.
Plus, Sapphire Steel also was rising in popularity. I don't think that's a good matchup. So at least for the last, congrats on the set champs. And for a smaller tournament, this can work out much better. I mean, this can also work out in a challenge, but at least from the numbers that Brendan told us earlier, I don't think it would have been a good bring to Dallas Fort Worth.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because of the increased Amber Steel and the Sapphire Steel.
In total, if you add up Emerald Steel, Sapphire Steel, and Amber Steel, how much is that? That's like 800 800 players.
You know what you do then, Wayne? Just dodge them. That's what you do.
Well, you can. It's a 2,000 player tournament. Your day one is going to be highly variable. Yeah. So I think you're like totally fine to get lucky in terms of matchups and make it to day two. But once you get into day two, you're going to be in the fire.
Yeah. But by the way, Emerald Amethyst is so bad against Emerald Steel. It's actually like it's so difficult to beat them. So yeah, it's like another deck. So like sure, Emerald Amethyst beats up upon Ruby Amethyst, which is a very much represented deck. Sapphire Ruby not so much, but against pretty much everything else, it is really, really tough to win. So yeah, you do get really lucky in your matchups for sure.
Well positioned versus 31% of the metagame. And then getting dunked on by 69%.
Mm-hmm. Although I will quickly say that, like, for set champ stuff, and this is not taking away from set champs because, like, I've lost set champs and stuff like that, but you can win set champs with decks that are pretty unique, I would say, or like not too common. Like I know Spessy won or came second in the set champs with like red green, and I saw red green in my set champs as well, which
I lost to red green.
I played one of my semifinals against the red green, and it was probably the closest match of the day.
Yeah, but like, there's these types of decks that I at least feel could perform decently in a set champs, but when you take this large scale event, 2,000 players, it's drastically different. So yeah. Next comment is from Dad Gamer. Got second playing Steel Song in a 24-person event. Went undefeated until the finals, where I drew horrible. My mulligans were poor both games against an uphill battle of Blue Steel. Steel Song is so underrated, but the only thing that really hurts is Blue Steel at the moment. Judy for flutes.
That's my comment. I asked for luxury to start playing Judy Hops because this person's right. This is a comment from last week, right? This is prior to Dallas Fort Worth. I mean, this is spot on. Like. This is a great metagame call. Did very well in Dallas. I don't have the day two conversion, but what I'm asking is like, because I think some of us here have an affinity for Ruby Sapphire. Like, are we adding in a Judy Hops? Because I feel like Judy Hops on a dime, it's okay. It's non-zero. It's not terrible. But a Judy Hops on a flute.
I'm ready for Moyen to bounce back because I know for a fact that Kim has talked to Moyen a lot about. Oh, Judy Hops for the dime, and Moyen's like, no, Judy Hops is a bad card.
So I detest Judy Hops and Ruby Sapphire. Basically, I'm in the mirror, especially because you never have for most of the game you don't have the luxury to not ink an inkable card. sometimes you don't even have the luxury to not ink an uninkable card because you have to quit it to get to some certain spot. And the last cards that you keep in your hand might be like Flower Charms or Develop Your Brains or Tamatowers. And so often you are not in the spot where you can just keep a card that might become good because you have to ink so many cards that you just keep the cards in hand that will definitely become good. So that's why I don't really like Judy Hopps, and it's not you don't have so many items that you're fine just playing Judy Hopps on a Popsicle. A lot of the time that means later down the line you have an item less for Tamatoa, an item less for Flower Charm. But it is very good against Ember Steel. No doubt about that. Against Ember Steel, they gain some lore, you stabilize, they're at like 10-ish lore, maybe a little bit less, maybe a little bit more. Then they play down 1 to 3 flutes most games and will try to stall you out until they win with flutes. If they have a flute less, that buys you a lot of time that makes a huge difference. So it is, while I absolutely hate the card in the deck, it will improve the Ember Steel matchup by a lot.
The way I would look at it, I think, and again, this is from someone like myself, I don't play Ruby Sapphire a lot, but I'm just thinking about the deck and all of these conversations we've been having over the past weeks about, like, it really does seem like the true deck that Ruby Sapphire has been struggling to beat for this while is Ruby Amethyst. So by putting Judy Hopps in the deck, then you're also sacrificing a card that could help you against Ruby Amethyst, which, I mean, we have seen that should be played more than Amber Steel. So I think that's fair, because like I think Judy Hopps against Ruby Amethyst is a very, very dead card. And yes, some people can just say it's inkable, but then you could just be like,
it hits the book. I saw a couple of books this weekend.
I don't know. I really,
but books are so rare.
I really disagree with the book these days in Ruby Amethyst. Yeah.
Also, while I do have an affinity for Red Blue for sure, I think for the next 2 weeks leading up to Bologna, I'll play all day, every day, to test all the different decks and then really make a decision.
This is what you did on Lille. This is how we know Moyen's cooking, because Moyen tested a lot before Lille and then landed on green purple. So we could
I think it was a great bring, but now it's a little bit more difficult to get all the reps in. But I will just play lots of rep gun.
Yeah, we need to get Moyen some more testing partners, because he keeps hitting.
I ask every day, and they say no every day.
We're working, bro. It's fucking Wednesday at 10 a.m., bro.
Apparently, they're working, but no shot. They're working every day.
What? Never asked on the weekend.
I literally was in the office. I had to stay late in the office today, bro. Like, Okay, next one is from Joseph. I said during Ursula's return spoiler season that Herc was good because of his 7th power. Giving Ruby Sapphire a way to answer Castle was extremely good, even if it's trading with something afterwards. It's almost always trades for 2 cards, around 2 to 3, and it just felt great. It is really funny when, like, I don't know, like, you look at cards in a vacuum. I think we all saw this card before and we just instantly said trash. And I don't know, like, you guys can disagree and say, oh, I saw potential. Personally, I just thought the card was trash. Because I just compare it to Maui and I'm just like, sure, you know, obviously the reason we're running it is like it is so good against the castle, but in a vacuum, I would say it's a pretty bad card. But if you guys felt different,
the power, I thought we did. I might be misremembering. Can I tangent real quick, by the way? Because I'm positive you guys didn't see any of this, because you definitely brought it up. So I had to evaluate this weekend. I had to evaluate 3 spoilers while on the Ravensburger dime live.
Oh my god, I didn't even realize this. So Brendan actually had to talk good about some cards. Oh my god. With Ravensburger in his ear, bro.
I think you guys would have thought this was hilarious.
Someone link the clips in the comments, please.
I think I did well, but I have a bit of reputation for going a little bit hard.
Bit of a reputation, yeah.
So I just thought it was funny. I obviously I did my job. I talked about where it could be good.
What were they? Tell us, because I've seen all the reveal cards, but I'm curious as to which ones they were.
One was like 3 cost, inkable, cantrip, give something reckless. I think it was an action. It wasn't even a song.
I actually did see that card, and apparently the hilarious thing about that is it was an exact same card in set 1 of that card, except it just didn't have the draw card. It just says 3 cost, inkable action, give something reckless. That's quite funny.
the other one was a 5-cost uninkable item that like recurred items from the yard. And I was like, this card, I mean, the card it's really good and limited. So, like it is. Recursive threats and limited are just very strong.
That's such a cop-out answer when you have to evaluate a card. Yeah, it's fine and limited.
Yeah, the only thing you could say that was good.
It was, I mean, it was 5-cost uninkable. We were playing fucking 8 popsicles right now in Sapphire Steel. Like that ain't making it in. The last one was like a really expensive one that had a good effect. I can't exactly remember it.
Was it Namari? No,
no, it was the one where it's like it stays on the field and then you like every time you play an item, they like lose 1 lore, you gain 1 lore, something like that, like some sort of gain 1 lore, lose 1 lore effect.
No, I saw one that was like there was an item if at the start of your turn, if a character of yours has more strength than all opposing characters,
yes, that's it. But it was very expensive, and I think
3-cost inkable item.
I think it's the first time we've seen that effect on something that's not like if you challenge, they gain, or if you enter the field
stuff.
Yeah, so that is
funny, bro. Cool. I want to watch those clips right now. That's the first thing I'm doing after this pod.
There's also the pirate song where you gain lore, they lose lore.
Yeah.
It's just.
Mm-hmm.
I think it was the first time we've seen a static effect like that, where you're making your opponent lose lore. So I talked about it being like, I think the card is a bit inefficient, but it could be a good way, like a good control card to actually lock your opponent out of the game, because you can't really do that right now. Oftentimes, once your opponent gets to some critical maximum of lore, like they can just quest for whatever's in the bottom right, and even if you trade on board, if you don't have sweepers and you don't have target removal, you're just going to lose the game anyway. So I thought it was cool in that sense. But
a very common situation is where your opponent plays gold and they go to 19, and if you can't get to 20, you don't win. I know there's cards in the game that would drain lore, but they're not really played in any deck. So like something where you don't lose if your opponent has a gold on board and it's on 19 might be welcome.
Yeah.
I'm curious. No. I hope that those were the only 3 card reveals they had at the stream, and they were all when you were on broadcast. I hope that's what it was.
Yeah, I just thought it was a bit poetic to I was like, this is like the first time they're gonna get me to say something nice about bad cards.
Okay, let's go back to the question though. Talk about the Hercules, right? So you think that we did evaluate it? At least we recognized the power potential.
I could be lying, but I think we did, and I think the card was clearly powerful in that sense. I mean, obviously we're playing 6-cost inkable, or we're playing a 6-power inkable Maui, which is ideal in a non-location willpower 7-power location willpower location dominated metagame. But I think it was pretty clear to see Hercules as like this answer to Queen's Castle, because that was already kind of a problem in the metagame. It's already very powerful.
Yeah, I think we were kind of spot on, because we were like, it's much worse than Maui if you compare it directly, but it's good against Castle. Then we were like, okay, how many castles would the metagame need to have for this to actually see play? How much of an issue would Castle need to be? Okay, it wasn't played at the start of the meta. Now that Ruby Amethyst is getting more and more popular, it's starting to see play. So I feel like we did a good job.
Mm-hmm.
And we could just be lying. We could have said the card was dog shit.
Yeah, I'll be honest. That's what I remember. But maybe these guys are just kind of cover that up. But next comments from Brian says, question for you guys: what is your opinion on a red steel deck with a hold up? So I actually have a lot of thoughts about this, because I'll give a shout out to Fabian, who is an intern over at the German Ravensburger team. He was present at Bochum. He was actually responsible for a lot of the stream and choosing players for the future match. So shout out to him. He did a great job, by the way. And he had a bunch of decks with him that we played with after the event. And he had a red steel deck, one that he built himself, and then one that the game development manager Tim built. And I will give also a shout out to Lorcana Villain. If you guys are actually really intrigued about what red steel looks like this set and are genuinely like interested in trying to make it work or what's the core, go check out Lorcana Villain's channel. He put up a video showcasing both deck lists, and I thought the deck was interesting. Personally, I don't think the power potential is even remotely there yet. I think it's a cool, fun deck to test around, but the biggest thing that it did was it utilized the new Namari card, which is, or actually could be an old Namari card, but it's a 3-cost 2/3 that whenever it damages something, then it also deals said damage to another card. So it's also a hero card. So you would utilize, it's not a hero card. You would sing the card I can't even remember. Maybe it is a hero card, but basically you sing the card. That means you can challenge ready characters, and then you would kind of pop off and clear your opponent's board. But from what I saw, like a lot about that deck is it's a very board focused deck, and I think we talked about this already with the whole idea of the Shere Khan package in Ruby back in set 2. When we saw locations, right, we thought, oh, maybe it's going to become more of a board based meta. Not to say that it isn't, but that when a whole deck's core is literally based around challenging, and then Lorcana players are smart enough to know when to quest, when not to quest, then it makes that deck really difficult unless you run these tools that allow you to challenge ready characters. So that's pretty much the sauce of the deck, how it gets rolling. But I just don't think there's enough support for it right now. But it's definitely interesting.
The red steel deck I've seen is the what's the character's name? It's the location deck with the character that gets like lore and resist and shit.
John Silver, right?
Yeah, that's the one I've seen.
Yeah, that's again a card that was insane in Sealed. I remember when that came out, so good.
I think the gray red deck built around Philo also gains a lot of lore without having to change. So there is something there. So I think that if you want to go in depth about why the deck doesn't like currently have a spot, it's in the top meta is that I think the baseline is it tries to use Whole New World, but in a very non-forcing way. So like it's good in the deck, but it will not be good against any Sapphire deck because it doesn't like do it fast and forcing enough. And then they just have this resource advantage. And it's not great at dealing with the Bucky Diablo deck. So I think it just against those 3 decks, it won't fare well. But I do think it has at least a close matchup against Red Purple that will just force them to play for board, and then it has tools to gain tempo and the Whole New World on top of it, tools to gain lore with the Philo. I think against Red Purple, it's completely fine.
Yeah, it's interesting for sure. Next comment's from Jacob. Moyen, thoughts on Dig a Little Deeper as a one-of in Red Blue as a closer something here.
Closer.
Oh, the closer. And a player got top 16 with it in Fort Worth, was running one of. Have you considered the card, Moyen? Do you know what it does?
Do you know this is a magic card, by the way? It's called Dig Through Time.
Oh, is there?
It's the same card.
The same card.
Look up Dig Through Time MTG.
Yeah. It's going to be the exact same card.
Yeah. With that, but that one has Delve. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think the card it's not really a closer. As like it doesn't. I mean, this on its own doesn't really close the game. It just means you get to your game closers, which I guess sort of makes it a game closer. But okay, so it's more like this card that makes your singers better. If you get to singers, it's great. You can't really spend anything on it. So you need like a 2-drop plus a Medusa to stick, or a Tala plus any of the Reckless cards, or maybe 2 Medusas, 2 rushes. You need 2 characters for it. That's not just one of the 5 drops plus a 2-drop. And then you will be able to sing this. And I think generally in Red Blue, you have to play for tempo a lot and ink a lot, and then kind of rely on your deck to provide the value for you to keep doing meaningful game actions from there. And Dig a Little Deeper definitely does that. It's also much better than just draw 2, because some of the time all you need is the dime to win, or maybe another Tamatora or like maybe you just need more value and you pick up like Tamatora plus Flavasham or something, and you're like never running out of value again. Or maybe you just need to clear the board, and this finds you the board clear. And even if maybe if you even had to hardcast it, and you can only play it next turn, but that could be good enough. I think I don't think you can play more than one with how expensive on an uninkable it can be, and you won't always be able to sing it. But as a one-off, I'm very much intrigued by it, and I think it could very well be worth including.
I think the card is not constructed playable. I know Din did well, and I actually saw this card resolved on stream. The problem is that I feel like, at the end of the day, I feel like removal is just not powerful enough in Lorcana, and why that's relevant is I find the margins in Ruby Sapphire to be very tight, and this kind of like ability to dig and find specific outs I find is only relevant in some of the more grindy matchups. And yeah, I mean, these sing together cards, they're very powerful. But the problem is like, especially when they're uninkable, it's like when you get behind on board, like they are just really, really, really bad. I love these kind of cards. I would love to play with Dig a Little Deeper, but I saw it in the list. I got to see it played, and I think ultimately my takeaway was like, there's no way I would fit this into my current edition of Ruby Sapphire. I don't think it's good enough, and I feel like that list right now is so tight because we're constantly trying to fit in, actually super relevant tech cards for the expected metagame.
Mm-hmm.
I just looked up the magic card. You can just exile cards from your graveyard instead of paying a mana.
Yeah, so that's Delve. It's a very powerful ability. Yeah.
Yeah, that Delve sounds broken.
Yeah, that's why. Yeah, so that's Delve. Delve is a very powerful ability in Magic in general, and some of the most powerful cards in some of the Eternal formats, some of the oldest Eternal formats do have access to Delve. But yeah, Dig a Little. Yeah, so Dig Through Time is just it's a really cool card, and I honestly wonder if part of this is Din just likes Dig Through Time from Magic, so threw one in his list because I don't think the card is particularly powerful, to be honest, in Lorcana.
Yeah, I saw some of the of their tweets, and they were like, everyone, yeah, Dick won't read this one, and I feel like they were over exaggerating a little bit, but I think it might actually be fine.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And with that, that's this building section done. The only other comment was again somebody asking you, Brendan, about what it was like working with the Ravensburger team.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. The community manager also reached out to me after and was like,
I saw that as well. That was really nice. Yeah.
That was really nice. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, I mean, honestly, at the end of the day, I'm very impressed with the Ravensburger team. I think that, yeah, a lot of them are like, that is a new team. Like, this is something they had to kind of build from scratch, and they had to sort of build quickly because the demand for OP was so high. But they do seem, I would say more than anything, they seem intentional, which is actually probably the best compliment I can give, because, if they're confident, they're intentional, and they're thinking about things and doing things for a reason, that means they care about the game, which is not always the case with the OP manager sometimes. So I walked away more optimistic rather than not. So it seems like it's going in the right direction, and they have big plans as well. Also, they were hustling, like they were out there talking to players. They were also there for like 12 hours, 14 hours, like we were. I mean, they had a very, very long weekend.
Every experience I've had with a member of Ravensburger staff has been extremely positive from anyone I've met. Honestly, like it's been really, really good, and I'm particularly excited to go over to Toronto next month and just experience, because I mean I've been to all of the EU challenges so far, so I'm curious to see if I think it's a similar atmosphere, if it's an even crazier atmosphere. Like I am super.
It's way crazier. It's way crazier. It's going to be insane. So, like, I'm not sure, how many, how many people you've been able to meet at these events, but I remember I had a friend, one of my co-hosts from Flesh and Blood. We had a podcast in Flesh and Blood, and he eventually came over to the US for a pro tour, and just due to the demographics of our audience, like I think might even be over 70% is in the United States. So like a lot of like the people that listen to this podcast and, like know you and play Lorcana actually in the US. And honestly, every time I go to an event in the US, every single time, I'm sure this might happen in Europe as well. So everybody's like, where's Cabo? Where's Moyen? I'm like, on the other side of the fucking world. Nowhere near us.
Yeah, the same thing happens.
That happens a lot. Yeah, they're like, where's Brendan? I'm like, the other side of the world. Yeah.
But I am very much looking forward to playing Seattle. I wish I could have played Toronto, but I'm on holidays, and then I'm looking forward to
Seattle. I think Seattle will be one of the coolest ones, because it will be so far it's the last announced one. Like it's the last event that we know of until the future of whatever the NA championship's going to be, or EU championship.
If I'm not qualified by then, I do the storyline of on the last possible event.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the NA event. Go take one of the NA.
It's going to be so funny.
That would be the best.
How hilarious would it be if I qual in Toronto and Moyen quals in Seattle? That would be the funniest.
And we can't do it in Europe, and then we both play one NA event.
We have to play the NA event then, yeah.
I do think Seattle is probably the one to go to, just because that's where Ravensburger's headquartered. Mm-hmm. Toronto's going to be dope as well, don't get me wrong. But, Yeah, it's gonna be. I think that will be a unique one because Ravensburger is located there, and they are for the most part in office, I believe. So I do think that most of the team will be at that event. So that's gonna be. Really
I will
cool.
say as well, though, I do think not to overshadow Europe. I personally think that Birmingham. I'm at Birmingham so far to me. If I'm as my expectations are kind of going for it, I think it'll be one of my favorite events of the entire year because at least for my local community, like pretty much everyone from my LGS is going over. So many people from EU. Like I'm really hyped for Birmingham. So if any of you guys aren't able to make it to Bologna and you are going to come to the UK, please come over and say hello to me and mine for sure.
Also, Birmingham has a nice mini golf court in the mall, like an adventure mini golf. So the reason it was kind of a snap decision that I booked flights for Seattle today because I realized I had forgotten to book flights to Italy, and now Seattle is like kind of the same price as Italy.
Yeah, for sure. All right. Well, with that, again, if you want to get your question read out on next week's podcast, shoot us a comment on YouTube. We'll get it queued up. And with that, we're going to head to our main topic, which is we're gonna have Ed on. We're going to be talking about Ruby Amethyst in particular, but also the metagame moving forward, some of the decisions in regard, the deck building decisions he made, sort of notable moments from the tournament, all that good stuff. So excited to talk to him. And yeah, let's head into it. Here we are joined by Edmond Chiu to talk about the Dallas-Fort Worth Disney Lorcana Challenge. Edmond was the champion after almost 2,000 players battled it out, bringing Ruby Amethyst to that tournament. Edmond, quite a run from you. How do you feel overall after taking the W? I saw your top 8 interviews, by the way. You're like, oh, I'm in top 8. I got my invite. It's a bit of a free roll. How'd you feel taking the whole thing down?
Yeah, I mean, it felt pretty good. In Chicago, I lost in top 16 or top 32 to not be able to get the invite. And I think my main goal when I wanted to accomplish for Fort Worth was to get the invite. And after I got it, I was really extremely happy, to be honest. Like the Mickey was, I mean, it's not like not money, but to me, it was mostly about the invite to be able to compete more. Mm-hmm. And then I guess after I won the top 8, locked up the Mickey, it was free roll, right? So I really didn't care. Like I lost one, who cares? But you just keep, you keep playing your game, and eventually, I just got there.
Do you have a history in trading card games? Did you play some games before Lorcana, or was this your first TCG?
Yeah, so when I was like a teenager, played a lot of Yu-Gi-Oh. Mm-hmm. I used to go to like the YCSs, but when you're like 15, you can't really travel, right? Like it's quite expensive. Like even going to like DLC events, it's at least like $1,000, $2,000 each time. So as a kid, it wasn't really feasible. So I went to like, local regionals, and maybe like I'm from the Bay Area, California. Mm-hmm. So I could go to like within California, you can go to some of the YCSs. And I was like kind of a mid player at the time. I mean, I was a teenager. I wasn't, that good at the game, but I had like a couple regional top 8s and like a top 32 at a YCS. Mm-hmm. And then after like my teenage years, I played a little bit of like, Friday Night Magic and, some like Magic Arena here and there. And I was like able to kind of go infinite in like the draft mode. So I thought I was like okay at that. And then I think when Hearthstone came out, I played a ton of Hearthstone. Like Hearthstone Arena, I was like also infinite in Hearthstone Arena. And I think that's what really taught me how to do like value trades and like pushing tempo. And I think that was the main thing that gave me that like TCG brain. You know what I mean?
All right, so looking at Dallas-Fort Worth, looking at sort of the macro metagame, trying to position of what deck you want to play for the list. We talked about it already in the podcast. I just want to see if I can pull up the image one more time. Actually, I might have had some private data in regards to the metagame because I didn't see it publicly posted. But, Ruby Amethyst ended up being the most played deck, followed by Emerald Steel, closely followed behind at that. The other way had about a 10% drop off to Sapphire Steel being the third most played, Amber Steel being the fourth most played, and Ruby Sapphire being the fifth most played. Ruby Sapphire holding up that fifth place at 7.4%. Is this the metagame that you expected when you brought Ruby Amethyst to the tournament?
Yeah, so I mean, within the circles that I'm in, I think this is actually extremely close to what we predicted. And I think only the Sapphire Steel we thought was going to be a little bit less, but everything else I think was on par. Something else that was also very surprising was the prevalence of Amber Steel. I thought just like the existence of some of these blue decks would push that out of the meta, but apparently like they're able to just like go on to play and just like blow people out. So I think besides that, everything we thought was on par.
Yeah, and
Go ahead. Go ahead. Oh, I was gonna say, like based on like Ruby Amethyst and Emerald Steel being the most popular, like I thought the Sisu was a good choice to bring into that field.
Yeah, and we'll talk about that list too. You did have a sort of a tech addition to your Ruby Amethyst list that we did not see in other RA lists. How did you end up on Ruby Amethyst, especially in the context of looking at the previous challenges, some of the conversion data, some of the winning decks? Like, how did you end up deciding to play Ruby Amethyst? Because it's a deck that I have a bit of affinity for, and it's a deck that I would wanted to play. Funny enough, we were talking on the podcast before the Dallas Lorcana challenge, and we were talking a lot about the dichotomy between the 4/1 drops and the 8/1 drops, and potentially trying to add in the brooms to this list. Does look like you were able to do that, and I did see you also were able to cut what in my opinion are the bad cards of the deck, like Beaking Undisputed and this Lady Tremaine. So you opted for a 2-0 split, which I think is both extremely bold and extremely correct. But in the context of these recent performances, you see the conversion data on Emerald Steel. How do you play something like Ruby Amethyst? Because traditionally, Emerald Steel has looked to have a favorable matchup into Ruby Amethyst, been converting at a ridiculous rate, and just seems to be, but the data says, is the best deck in the format, almost regardless of whatever shows up.
Yeah. So I guess the first part of that question, like how to end up on Ruby Amethyst. Mm-hmm. So I've played Ruby Amethyst basically since like the beginning, since I played the game. Mm-hmm. My very first deck was actually Amber Steel, and this was when Queen just came out. And I realized like there was this one time I just like my hand was just a complete brick, right? And then I just like, I literally can't do anything. And ever since then I basically dropped the deck. Mm-hmm. And I felt like I didn't want to put myself in these spots where like I just couldn't play the game, right? So I guess with that kind of mindset, I kind of built this deck kind of similar in that vein. So I follow like I think I mentioned it. Well, I mentioned this to some other people, but like Matthew Wright, he gave me a lot of inspiration to create this deck because after he got second at Atlanta, he had the tournament thread in his Twitter saying like, oh, actually a lot of the cards in this deck should be counted as uninkable, right? So he said specifically Goat, Castle, and like the Madamim cards should be counted as uninkable. And because of that, you kind of need to go lower on the uninkable count in order to never have to ink those cards in like those late game spots.
Interesting. So yeah, Goat considered an uninkable. One of the reasons we were tossing up the idea of adding in the 8/1 drops is, of course, the added consistency, and having the 1 drop on 1 is great. But also, I felt like with 4/1 drops, the ability to even have the option to play out things like Madamim or Fox that seemed very, very low. And it kind of felt like, even though that's not even the ideal use case for those cards anymore, is maybe bounce to the 1 drop back because all the 1 drops can trip. It still felt like that secondary game plan when you don't have Flynn Sisu was just not available. Specifically talking about Flynn Sisu and that new play line that came out in the recent set. Does that change the gameplay dynamic of Ruby Amethyst significantly, having access to those cards and that powerful aggressive curve?
Yeah. So in Chicago, I actually didn't run Flynn Sisu at all. Mm-hmm. I ran like Cusco, didn't run the Sisu, and I was able to have a little bit more flexibility with the uninkables. And I also ran 2 Teeth. So before, I don't think Emerald Steel was as popular, but was still definitely one of the main, contenders of the format. And I thought like we needed additional methods to deal with Diablo besides just Brawl, right? Mm-hmm. So I thought 2 Teeth was a good choice for that. And I thought it was pretty good, but I had 2 losses like 1 loss in day 1. And then I eventually lost to Sky in day 2 in top 32. And I thought that the reason why I lost was I wasn't able to apply enough pressure to him. So eventually I cut the Cusco to add the Flynn Sisu package to be able to better apply pressure to these type of blue decks in the beginning.
With Teeth, I would assume you would have to Teeth the Cusco because unless you're playing a 1 drop like Olaf, it's a pretty rough trade. Did you ever consider things like Peter Pan Shadowfinder as additional ways to deal with Diablo?
Yeah, so I did test Peter Pan Shadowfinder, and I thought he was a little bit too narrow I think it's okay against Ruby Amethyst if you can hold it until like you have like 9 ink for the, Shadow Finder, Fox Shadow Finder to kill a castle, or like Maui plus Shadow Finder at 8 to be able to take out a castle. But besides that, it's not really something you want to deploy in the beginning. I know some people are like, you can play it on 3, sing friends, but I always thought that was a kind of mid. And I think I ran into too many spots where like that card was just completely dead. And I thought I needed like a better blowout card, and that's how I kind of arrived at the big Sisu.
Yeah, it definitely is. It definitely is mid. But in regards to dealing with Diablo, like if you want to have the turn 3 answer to Diablo, I believe the way the percentages work out is with the 4 of answer, you are just above 70%, and then with the 6 of answer, you actually come closer to 90%. This is assuming like 2 draws for the most part prior to dealing with the Diablo. So that's kind of the idea behind it. How did you feel? Just having those 4 advantages. Also, I just want to get the sort of the high level question for you. Did you feel like you were significantly unfavored into Emerald Steel, or did you feel favored with your Ruby Amethyst list?
Yeah. So I guess before that, I also wanted to say that I also study like the hypergeometric calculations. Like I'm a huge fan of like Frank Karsten. Always visit like his TCG player article regarding like how many 1-drops you need, how many cards you need to see, and I think that heavily influenced like this list as well, right? Like I know a lot of people that run like the 4 Chernobyls, it's like you're seeing it only like 55% or something of the time, and I thought that was just a little bit too inconsistent, and like I felt way more comfortable running like the 8 1-drops. So I think that also affected like why I ran Teeth back in Chicago, because like you said, like the 6 gave you way more answers on the spot against Diablo. So I mean, I think the brooms kind of help in that, because I think something that is a little bit underrated about the card is you can always like play it on turn 1, and then if you have like additional brooms or like another Chernobog, like double broom plus Chernobog, you can always pop those 2 brooms and then leave the Chernobog and then pop that to turn after that, to be able to cycle like 3 cards deeper into your deck. And I think I know some people are like, oh, what if they go like Diablo, shift Diablo, hit you with the storm? So in regards to that, I think, to be honest, it doesn't really happen to me that often, because if you think about it, you kind of need like 2 Diablos and then like 2 actions. So like to me, it's like if they have it, they have it. But I still go for that play if I need to find an answer to Diablo.
And how did you feel about the Emerald Steel matchup overall as Ruby Amethyst? Did you feel favored or unfavored going into this tournament?
To be like, okay, yeah. So I guess the question. So when I was playing at like my locals and stuff like that, before I didn't honestly test the Sisu that much. It was more like just like a thought experiment in the beginning. I felt like I didn't have enough answers to the card after they spill out everything, right? And I felt like I needed like 1 more Be Prepared, or maybe 2 more Be Prepareds. And I felt that this Sisu kind of like filled that role. And I think after adding the Sisu, I felt like the deck was like actually a little bit favored against Emerald Steel, unless they opened the Super Nuts, right? Because I feel like Emerald Steel is definitely like, to me, is like a high roll deck, right? If you open the Bucky, multiple Diablos, that's the hands that you just can't beat no matter what. But if they don't open that and it's like a medium roll, I think this deck has a very good chance against it.
Yeah, for sure. And Moin, I want to pass over to you. Moin, you want to take us through the day 2 conversion data? We actually got that just yesterday after we finished recording the pod. Do you want to read it out for us? Because because it's ridiculous.
I was craving for the initial count of decks, and I didn't have that. And then as soon as you gave it to me after the pod, I went.
Oh, you did this? This was you that did the math?
No, I was then talking to some other players, and they immediately went into it and analyzed it. So yeah, in the end, Ruby Amethyst had a minus 10% in change in ratio, so like minus 10% conversion rate from initial count. And Emerald Steel had plus 23%. Sapphire Steel, Ember Steel, and Ruby Sapphire were about the same. Had about the same representation in top cut as they had in the initial field. And the rogue color combinations, if you combine all of those together, like minus 20%. And yeah, analyzing this, I don't know. It seems like even if so basically the thought over the recent weeks for me has always been that Ruby Amethyst players are coping a little bit with the Emerald Steel matchup, and it really is not fine for them. Especially now, I think Emerald Steel is Prince John in Emerald Steel is increasing popularity, kind of as a way to improve both the Ruby matchups. And while for like very strong Ruby Amethyst players against like a mediocre Emerald Steel player, they probably are fine, but I think I cannot find a different explanation for this data than that for the majority of the field, the matchup's very not fine, and that is the only way I can really justify why Ruby Amethyst has such a bad conversion rate when it clearly is fine against the like Sapphire decks, and Emerald Steel having such a good conversion rate.
Let me break this down just in case people don't understand what you meant by plus minus 20%, plus 23%. So what he's talking about is the ratio of the field. So for example, the ratio of the field of Ruby Amethyst was 22.67%. The ratio of the field of Emerald Steel was 21.83%. But the conversion ratio into top 64 for Ruby Amethyst went from 22.6%. This is ratio of the top 64, and it was 12.5% of top 64. So it's a minus 10% on the general amount that was in the field. For Emerald Steel was 45.31% of top 64. It was almost half of it, and that is a plus 23% over its ratio in the field. This, my biggest takeaway, I'm going to pass over to you, Ed. I just don't. Okay, I like to be data oriented. I like the math. I like doing things like that. I also hate playing decks like Emerald Steel because they're boring as fuck, and they're painful to play because they are just it's fun to curve out. And it's fun to do the busted thing, but when you can't do the busted thing, it can really be an unpleasant experience. But if I'm competing at a major competitive tournament with 2,000 players, how the fuck do I deny playing Emerald Steel? The data is ridiculous. Every tournament, it's ridiculous. 50% of the top 8. It's like it's converting well every single time. And we're talking about a deck that everybody's bringing. It's not like with Ruby Amethyst, you're like, there's only a couple good Ruby Amethyst players. And like, that's kind of the cope, right? Is people are just like, oh, there's just so many bad ones or something like that. That's why it's so bad. It's not the good players, it's the bad players that are holding it down. But Emerald Steel's got bad players too. And they just top 64, no problem, it seems. What's with this?
Okay, to me, in my experience, I feel like it's easier to do well with Emerald Steel than it is to do well with Ruby Amethyst. Like, I think Ruby Amethyst, it seems very easy to play, right? Oh, you just draw some cards and stuff. But I think it's actually quite difficult to master versus I think the floor for playing Emerald Steel is still, you're still going to get the nuts and it's still going to play itself, if that makes sense. Like, if you get the nuts in, there's no nuts in like Ruby Amethyst, to be honest. Like, yeah, you can do like the Flint Sisu thing, it's pretty good. But sometimes that's not even good, obviously, against like Emerald Steel, right? So I think the floor for Ruby Amethyst is way lower, but the ceiling I think is higher. So, I mean, I'm not going to say it's like easier to pick up and you just play and you just go, but I think you don't need as much time on Emerald Steel to kind of figure out like what the core game plan of that deck is.
100%. I also think like the differing lines you're going to be taking based off your matchup doesn't change too much. So one thing that happened to me a lot in the booth, and I think this, and by the way, I'm not saying that my co-casters, they were asking this question on purpose because they knew the answer, but we asked for the audience. They would ask, okay, so Emerald Steel is now on the draw. They're playing against this different deck. They're playing against, this Amber Steel deck instead of this Ruby Amethyst deck, or they're playing against Ruby Sapphire and then instead of whatever. And they're like, how does their game plan change? And I'm like, well, it doesn't. They just try to do the same thing every single time. For the most part, there's minor tweaks, but Emerald Steel really is the linear deck that asks the question and wants to do the busted thing every time. And I think that people, the general Lorcana community, to an extent, is coping by not playing the deck and not accepting how powerful it truly is. Because the deck, with this kind of conversion data, I think that at tournaments, we should see a higher representation of Emerald Steel. I think Emerald Steel should be overwhelmingly the most played deck, but somehow Ruby Amethyst edges it out. I think Ruby Amethyst it's a much more, I don't know, you can't really say fun because one man's trash, another man's treasure when it comes to fun in card games, but you have a lot more decisions, you're in every game, it just feels like you have a lot of agency over the game, which often, most of the times when you talk about TCGs, that's a complete fallacy, but it feels like it. So I'm really interested to see Bologna, and if Emerald Steel is not the most played deck, what are you people doing? Like Emerald has got to be the most played deck. This data is ridiculous. I'm going to dive into this list a little bit more, Ed, by the way. So, we talked about the 8-1 drops, so we kind of, you explained that, but talk to me about the 2-0 Madame Medusa Lady Tremaine split. So we had this debate on the podcast for kind of a while. It was like, how many Tremaines do you play? How many Medusas do you play? How about you just play all Medusas? You play 0 Tremaines, because Medusa is the objectively better card in regards to the metagame, because it has more coverage over more things in the metagame. But you do open yourself up to like, okay, Tamatoa fucking farms you. There's just cards that you kind of lose to, and that's okay. You're just okay with that, because if you have Madame Medusa, you're not drawing Lady Tremaines against Emerald Steel and Amber Steel, where it's just kind of a dead draw. Talk to me about the 2-0 split specifically.
Yeah, so I've been playing Ruby Amethyst for a long time, and I don't know if you guys saw the coverage for like the CCS 8K long time ago, maybe like 4 months ago. I got second there with 4 Medusa, 4 Tremaine, 4 Maleficent Dragon, right? So that was like kind of the real extreme like control oriented build of the deck. And where the sacrifices was I was actually not playing castle at the time. So that deck's game plan was just every turn after turn 6 you just blow up something, right? And it worked pretty well, but eventually like decks got a little bit faster, so you needed to kind of adapt to that. And I guess fast forward to now, Chicago, I ran 3 Medusa, 3 Tremaine, no Sisu, 14 Uninkables. And I thought that was like a good balance. But then I realized that I was playing against a lot of Emerald Steel, and the B King and Tremaines were just like completely dead cards. Always discarded, not very helpful. So I came in thinking like, okay, if Green Steel and Ruby Amethyst were going to be the most popular decks, which of the Uninkables were actually good against them, right? And I thought Tremaine and BKU were also bad against Ruby Amethyst, because most of the time you can sit on like, sometimes you even sit on like the 1-drops, right? You do like the 1-drop Flincy, so you kind of just sit on them forever. You can block the B King with your 1-drop. So, and Tremaine also dies to the Medusas, right? Like it's a Medusa magnet, right? So I personally was just saying like, okay, I'll just, against blue, my strategy was just to go a little bit more aggressive. And, if you don't win by, turn 5 or 6, or not necessary, because I guess against like Ruby Sapphire, I got to like 12 ink or whatever, right? But you wanted to be more aggressive, and I was thinking like, you just get ahead on the lore lead, and then you close the game out from there. So based on that kind of like frame, I wanted to just run like a lower amount of Uninkables to be able to play that kind of aggressive strategy, because I realized that when you had like, the 4 1-drops with 16 Uninkables, it was actually very hard to open that like 1 Flynn, Sisu, Go, Castle, whatever play, right?
Yeah.
Because that required the 4 Inkables and those 4 cards, right? And if you only open like by that turn, you would have 7 plus like 4 or 5, so you have like 12 or 13 cards. You need to have those 4 plus the 4 or 5 more Inkables, like 9 inkable cards, and then the others have to be non-inkable, right?
Yeah, the math is tough on that one. I don't know if it's over or under a quarter. I mean, I'm pretty sure it's under, but yeah, it's pretty low.
Yeah, but like sometimes you hit that variance where you just draw a bunch of the uninkables, like multiple Medusas, multiple Be Prepareds, multiple Tremaines, BKUs, etc. And then now you have an extremely awkward hand that you can't ink. Like I'm sure you've run into it before, right? You go Flynn, Sisu, BKU or Goat or whatever, and then the rest of your hand is like Medusa, Prepared, Tremaine, and then it's like, oh, I have no draw, and like if they kill my board, I'm just toast. I can't ink for the rest of the game. Right?
Yep, been there. I mean, I would have been happy to die on the hill. The B King Undisputed is just a terrible card in general, and like maybe you could take me to court and make the case that it's like necessary in this metagame, but I don't think so. It's just like B King is just a terrible card. It's like it feels good sometimes when you tempo your opponent out, like you beat prep them, then you put like a fucking rabbit on the battlefield, and then they put a Tamatoa down. You're like B King. Like, it feels good. Yeah, agreed. But even some of these Sapphire decks now are recruiting all these 2-drops and 3-drops and stuff to deal with Diablo. So it's like they're insulated against this edict effect. So it really makes Tremaine and the B King bad. And the B King is just a 1-for-1 trade at best. So very metagame contextual, very much just like, in my opinion, not a good card in Lorcana. So I was happy to see it out. And also, I mean, I saw your list pop up on the screen. I was like, oh shit, we got a gamer here because 4 of Central, very very intentional deck building. I mean, I also want to talk about a particular 4 of that you have that a lot of people cut one of, which is the Be Prepared. What were your thoughts on B Prep? Why did you go up to the 4? Because I guess in this list, because you're not playing like BKU and you're not playing Lady Tremaine, you can afford the uninkable slot, right?
Yeah. So I'm honestly like, people know me as like the purist, right? Like all my lists are like 4, 4, 4, 4, and then you have like a couple tech cards that are like uninkable. Like before I ran like like 2 fish hooks and like a spell book and like a crab. Those are like little tech cards, but everything else, the core needs to be there, the consistency. Like I always value like the consistency of the deck, right? So wait, where was your question?
It was with the 4th B Prep. It's just a card we saw go down to 3 a lot, because it can be so dead for so long, especially in those like you mentioned the format speeding up. It's like if you end up with B Prep in your opening hand, you're like, oh fuck, okay, first discard target to Bucky, let's go.
Yeah. Okay, so so the 4 B preps. So I know a lot of people wanted to cut one, and I was even thinking about cutting one to like go to 3 Sisu just to be able to do like the shift play on 6. But I realized that B prep was one of those cards that really got you out of like any jam, basically, right? And just the threat of it like can win you the game sometimes. Like people can't overcommit, lets you catch up on the board. So the way I kind of like to play Ruby Amethyst is my first kind of 6 turns pre Be Prepared is just to like kind of draw, kind of feel my opponent out, right? Like if you look at the deck, it's mostly just like you're drawing cards, you're cantripping, you're looking for whatever answers you need for your opponent, and then eventually they overcommit, then you Be Prepared. And like the way I like to play the game is like you feel them out, and then post Be Prepared you can start actually playing the game, right? So I think I frame the deck like, okay, you need to resolve a Be Prepared at some point, like probably on turn 7 or 8, and then you can, go from there.
Talk to me about the 2 Sisu. You mentioned they were a bit of a last minute addition, kind of a more theoretical addition. How'd they end up actually performing for you on the day?
Yeah, so Sisu definitely caught a lot of people off guard, especially in closed deck lists. Like in day 1, I was able to like shift to Sisu and sing Be Prepared on the same turn, because a lot of people that were on the green decks that had like the Ursula, they would always save it for that, when I have 6 ink, they save it for that next turn, right? To rip the Be Prepared out of my hand. So, I mean, that was a very common strategy. Every green player does that, right? But you can get into these spots where you can actually play the Be Prepared 1 turn earlier than they would expect and blow them out of the game. So, I mean, this wasn't like extremely common, but it does definitely come up and can catch people off guard. Besides that, it still felt like against the green decks, it was like playing 6 Be Prepared, right? Because I know some people are like, oh, you're going to draw this Sisu too late. It's like on 8 ink or whatever. But I realized that it's also like a good top deck, right? Like there's going to be some spots where before Sisu, you just ink to 7. And then if you rip the B Prep, you win the game, right? You rip the B Prep and then you don't necessarily win, but your top decking ability is way better than Green Steel. And I thought the Sisu basically added like 2 additional Be Prepared style cards into the deck.
For sure. And I just want to talk a little bit about extrapolating this metagame to the future. So mostly to Bologna, but also to the set championships that are going to be happening this weekend. You're looking towards that. So you're a player that likes to draw a lot of cards. You like to do the powerful stuff. What do you think about Ruby Sapphire in the current metagame, the current editions of Ruby Sapphire? In the notes here, I do have Sailor's list pulled up. So this is a Ruby Sapphire list that in particular has been very teched to sort of beat a Emerald Steel, but also a Ruby Amethyst dominated metagame. Is this an archetype that you've had a chance to sort of play with?
Yeah, so I do have some friends that play Ruby Sapphire, and like I've never lost to Ruby Sapphire in Set 4, but I mean, I haven't really played, I just haven't lost to Ruby Sapphire yet. But yeah, right now, these kind of new iterations with like the Pegasus to block Flynn and, Hercules, Vitalisphere to deal with castles definitely makes it a little bit harder. And you need to be a little bit more intentional with how you play. Like I think, in my future match, right, I had to kind of save up for 3 castles, because if you just play 1 or 2 castles, it's extremely easy to deal with, right? You kill one with like Vitalis, Sphere, Tamatoa, and then you kill the other one, Hercules. GG, right? You can't do anything. But I think if you're able to kind of get to that spot where you can play 3 and you can play like multiple goats after that, I think that's usually how you would try to end the game against them. Because I think Ruby Sapphire, you can only kind of deploy one card at a time, right? Unless you get to like those obscene inks where you can do like multiple things. But I think most of the time you only could deploy one thing. So I think that's how I kind of play that matchup.
Yeah, I think if you're interested in the Ruby Sapphire Ruby Amethyst matchup, you could go watch back some of Edmond's game. You actually see a really good example of Edmond recognizing sort of his position in the match. And there was points when Edmond actually out attrition, out card drew his Ruby Sapphire opponent. I believe this was your game. Was able to get so far ahead on card advantage, take sort of inefficient trades because of that, and then ultimately win the game with like what I think at one point, I think it was against Ruby Sapphire, you triple castled, which of course you had in hand for a long time. But it, like the Ruby Sapphire matchup, once we get out of those early turns, like Ruby Sapphire is the better control deck. It is a better control deck. It has more reach, as Tamatoa, it has Dime. But the Ruby Amethyst deck can actually outgrind it if the cards are sequenced correctly and you're able to get your strong draw engine, and they don't. And you saw that happen with, I believe it was Edmond, who was denying the Flavershams, allowing multiple activations on them, but at the same time was constantly bouncing the rabbits back and forth, was drawing a lot of cards, and had like massive card advantage over its your Ruby Sapphire opponent. Because of that, I think you actually took like it's either a 3-for-1 or a 4-for-1 B prepping your own board and killing the Tamatoa, because that was like the only thing your opponent could do. Your opponent had like barely any cards in hand compared to you, and you're like, okay, I'll just inherently 4-for-1 myself, and then clear the board. And I think you actually dropped you may have dropped the triple cast after that, but yeah, it's a really interesting way to sort of approach the matchup, and understanding card advantage, understanding attrition, and being able to take those lines was really interesting. Morn, were you saying something before I interrupted?
Yeah, no, it's just I have some interest in Ruby Sapphire, so I reviewed that game, and I do think if your opponent played it correctly, you would have lost your first game to Ruby Sapphire. There was one turn where they sang How Far I'll Go with a Thala that I think should have just traded into a Maui protecting Flaversham.
Oh yeah, I remember.
And if they just if they go How Far I'll Go hardcast Medusa there, they completely have the tempo locked up. They could have picked Dime up, played it. You still have to be prepped the next turn. I think they're totally winning from that spot, and but that turn really allowed you to get back into the game where, okay, of course, if they draw into more Tamatoas, they probably still win. But this mistake, I think, just gave you this window of opportunity to claw your way back into the game.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I definitely agree with that. Yeah, go ahead.
No, you're good. Go ahead.
Oh yeah, I was gonna say no. I definitely do agree with that. But I think Ruby Sapphire is definitely like a harder deck to pilot. Like I think it's actually a very well positioned deck, but I don't have like a time chamber to play infinite games of Ruby Sapphire. So I mean, yeah, in that particular spot, it might just be an experience. Like if everyone's Moyen, right? Then yeah, probably it'll be much harder to play in that matchup.
Yeah, it's particularly interesting because, I mean, of course, we have the set champs this weekend, but we also have Bologna, and it's like, this deck is, if we look at the statistics, I mean, it's dogs. It's pretty bad. Like, the conversion rate on this deck is not very good. We actually saw, I was really surprised it was brought under Amber Steel, but it's just there's not a lot of compelling reasons if you were sort of data-oriented and you were agnostic of context to play something like Ruby Sapphire. That being said, I kind of waffle between like Ruby Sapphire and Ruby Amethyst being the best decks in the game. Emerald Steel is just not on my list of things to do. I don't think it's powerful enough. I don't think it's powerful enough.
In this episode, you asked people what are they doing if they're not playing Emerald Steel at Bologna, because the conversion rate has been insane.
Do as I say, not as I do. Do as I say. I just don't. I mean, I don't want to sit there and try to do the thing. I don't know. At this point, I do feel like, and I think this is a huge fallacy in card games. So once again, do what I say, not as I do. Huge fallacy in card games that people will make choices on decks because they believe there is a large skill gap, or they think there's a large information asymmetry. Most of the time, that's the worst way to approach playing a card game. But if you're ever going to do it, these early days of the time, and I feel like you can bring some of these decks that might not be backed up by data, and they feel okay into the field. I don't want to bring Green Steel, not have my nut draw, and then just lose to some Kimmy who's on a fucking puppy deck, and I'm like, ugh. And what do I do?
Instead, you can play Ruby Amethyst, have all your
just lose to everybody.
Lose to Timmy playing the Emerald Steel.
yeah. I'll take my chances.
Yeah.
Emerald Steel is just, it's really not on the menu, I think, let's be real, for most of us, but it is the best deck in the game. We have to acknowledge that in terms of conversion rate. Edmund, if you were looking towards the set championships this weekend, I don't know if you are playing any. Are there any changes you would make to the Ruby Amethyst list?
So I think this deck was actually very meta dependent per tournament basis. I think for me, I was actually very comfortable with like the 12 uninkables.
Mm-hmm.
I know a lot of people, like, the first thing they want to do is cut like the brooms or cut the maleficents, but I think that's probably not correct. I think those are the cards that kind of fix your hands that are just very unplayable. So I'm sure you run into the spot. You have Flynn Rider, Sisu, but maybe nothing else. You can't get any card draw. You don't have like a rabbit or something. And sometimes that Maleficent on turn 4 with like a broom is exactly what you need to kind of fix your hand, right? So I think a lot of people are in love with like, oh yeah, I opened like Turnabout, Flynn, Sisu, Rabbit without like these consistency cards, and they remember those times, but don't remember the times where, you know, you brick and you just can't play the game.
Mm-hmm.
So if you do want to sacrifice some power or sacrifice some consistency for some power, I would recommend taking out like maybe 1 or 2 Maleficents to add more uninkable cards. I think the magic brooms shouldn't be cut because I think the 1-drops, like getting that 90%, you know, being able to open a 1-drop is very important. Like I'm starting to notice like, you know, some aggro decks starting to show up, and you're going to need to be able to like combat some of those like 1-drops, right? Or just be able to like do 1-drop, bounce it with a snake. Like snake being a 3/3 is actually very relevant. Like it can, you know, combat everything basically early game. Right. So personally, I wouldn't cut it. And I think the 3-drop slot is also very full right now. Like we have Fox, we have Sisu, we have Brawl. Sometimes you hardcast Friends. And I think those 4 cards are definitely not cuttable, especially in this shell with like the big Sisu. So I think the only thing that kind of makes sense that you can kind of take out is this Maleficent. So
that's exactly what we were. That's exactly what we. I think that you are aligned with Moyne and I. That's exactly what we were talking about because you have basically 1-drop Maleficent in the form of these broom and these Turnabogs. Like sometimes you get let the Storm Rage on, sometimes you get blown out, but like Maleficent is a card I feel like it has been getting power crapped out of the game for a while. But it's like, you know, are we still trying to be the control deck? You know, if I'm in the mirror, I really need that card advantage. But ultimately, a 3-cost 2/2 that cantrips is like not really doing much except sitting friends on the other side. And you're like, I have other targets to sitting friends on the other side that can do that much better at this point. So, yeah,
I do really love the list. I think even against Sapphire decks, just to chime in a bit, I think even against Sapphire decks, this deck might still be better, even if you don't have the B King, just because of how good. Like how that added consistency of more uninkables and more 1-drops and more 3-drops really works out. That might just be enough to counteract the lack of B Kings. And I think it really, like having lower uninkables or being able to play Maleficent on 3, all of that snowballs so much because in the end it might mean you didn't have to ink friends on the other side because you had an extra inkable, or maybe because your hand worked out in a way where you did draw some uninkables and you played Maleficent on 3 instead of Sisu to really get to your rabbit or get to your rabbit while keeping a friends. And that can result in so much card advantage where I think people can really underestimate how much in this particular deck going low on uninkables, adding consistency with multiple Maleficents, 8 1-drops really changes how games can play out.
Yeah, 100% agreed. All right. And we want to sort of give you a chance to shout out where people can find you, what you're up to, you know, anything you want to. The floor is yours. I have your Twitter, by the way, under your face right now. So that is at Ed Lorcana.
Yeah. So before I didn't have Twitter, but I was like, you know what, maybe I should make one for this and, you know, kind of share my thoughts on the whole experience. I guess I didn't really think I was going to get that far, right? Like I was like, maybe I'll try to get my invite and I'll be happy. But this was definitely like a very like life-changing experience for me. Like being able to like win a tournament, it's extremely hard to win like these type of like 2,000 people tournaments, right? And Like I never thought I would win one, but you know, you just you got to keep grinding, right? And I think that's, you know, what keeps me coming back, right? Like there's always something to kind of look forward to. And yeah, so I'm still gonna go to all the challenges, even though, you know, I've already, you know, did what I wanted to do, just because, you know,
it's fun. Crush some invites. Go take some invites at top 16.
No, you're helping, right? Like if you make it to top 16 again, you're giving the next person.
Does it pass down?
The invite? Down? Yeah, it does pass down.
Oh, that's too bad. I did want to. I kind of do this sometimes. I fake this out with ending the pod. I know Moyne has to go, but I have to ask you one question because it's front of my mind. Do you think that they should switch to a day 2 Swiss and to cut to top 8 instead of cut to top 64? This would be a cut of around 300 to 400 players, most likely. You would do more Swiss rounds and then you would cut to top 8. Or do you like this cut to top 64 format?
I mean, is it time equivalent? Like you still play the same amount of rounds, or is it different?
It's relatively time equivalent. It would probably last a little bit longer.
So, I mean, I a lot of people ask me like, what do you think about 2-game format? And I think 2-game format actually kind of works out specifically for Swiss, because I think eventually all the top players with like the best decks will eventually get to like the top 64 anyway, because like, you know, you need to win on the draw, right? Like if you win game 1, your opponent's gonna win, or in a best of 3, right? Your opponent's gonna go be on the play on game 2, and you have to beat them there. So I think it works out in that way. Day 2 was definitely pretty grueling, like a top 64, like best of 3, like, you know, it takes a long time and it's like very mentally draining, right? But you're saying like we'll just go to top 8 after like more Swiss rounds?
Yeah, so you would cut, you do like an X2 cut or something like that, or an X3 cut to day 2, and then you just run more Swiss rounds, then you take the top 8 of Swiss. Like the large top cuts are actually very atypical in TCGs. They happen in, I believe, One Piece, and I think they happen in Pokemon, actually maybe Yu-Gi-Oh! So all the games that you guys play. But in Magic and in Flesh and Blood, in day 2, so the thing about adding more Swiss rounds is people get more agency to sort of compete, and they get to play more games. And then it's not that your top 8 is more indicative of the better players than this system. I think this system is fine, but ultimately the people that flew across the world to play Lorcana and to play competitively, not to play side events, they get to do that more, and that feels better in my opinion. I think the cut to top 64 is it's an aggressive cut with 2,000 people, or nearly 2,000.
Well, I mean, yeah, I can see what you're saying. Like, there's 2,000 players. What's the other 1,950 people going to do right on the second day? So it kind of does make sense to be able to like have more people included in that. And yeah, I think it is a little aggressive, and it's like extremely hard to make like day 2 in this type of like, you know, top 3% or whatever, right?
So I just wanted to ask, because the only thing I want to see changed, and I know that people are very vocal about 2-game versus 3-game format, and I don't think that you can make an objective case against one or the other. I think that they're just fundamentally different. This one works fine, but I would that's the main one where it's like I just want to get, you know, higher level players' thoughts on how they should maybe run those tournaments in the future, because I know Ravensburger is looking for feedback as well.
To be honest, I haven't thought about it that much, but it does make sense, like allowing more people to play, right? Like, because like, you know, for good players, you do want to play more games, right? Because that allows you to show your like skill advantage, and, you know, you lower the variance, right? But I mean, obviously, like I feel like maybe I'm biased because like I've been able to like day 2 a couple times or 2 times, and like I like the format the way it is, but I can definitely see like adding more Swiss rounds, letting more people play in day 2, like is probably healthier for the game in general.
For sure. Well, Ed, we want to thank you for coming on the podcast. We appreciate you joining us, and it's great to hear from you. It's great to hear from, you know, someone who went through that 2,000 player gauntlet and, you know, is able to speak about their deck and speak about the strategy that got there. For people listening, all the links to decks and anything we talked about will be in the description. There's a link to the Disney Lorcana Discord, as well as the channel we talked about. If you want to get feedback on Dallas, I recommend you do. And yeah, thank you all so much for listening. We will see you all next week.